In the spring of 1978, a Coptic codex surfaced in Cairo. It had been buried for 17 centuries. Inside its frayed pages, scholars found a text the church had tried to erase, the Gospel of Judas. But what they discovered wasn't what they expected. It wasn't a confession, it was a revelation. And according to the manuscript, Judas didn't betray Jesus. He obeyed him. If everything you were taught about the greatest betrayal in history was a lie, would you want to know the truth? The story begins long before that Cairo basement. It begins in the sand. In the 4th century, when Christianity was still young and dangerous, a group of monks living near Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt made a choice. They had been ordered to burn their books. The newly formed church, now backed by Roman power, had declared certain texts heretical. Gnostic gospels, secret teachings, texts that spoke of Jesus not as a sacrifice, but as a guide to hidden knowledge. The monks refused. Instead, they sealed their library in a jar and buried it beneath the cliffs. Among those texts was a gospel no one was supposed to read, the Gospel of Judas. For over 1,600 years, it stayed hidden. Then in December 1945, a farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was digging for fertilizer near a boulder. His shovel struck something hard, a jar. He hesitated. In Egyptian folklore, jars buried in the ground often contained jinn, but he was poor. He broke it open. Inside were 13 leather-bound books. He took them home. His mother used some of the pages to start fires, but others survived, and they began to circulate, slowly, quietly. One of them contained a gospel the church had condemned in the 2nd century, a gospel written in the voice of the one man history taught us to hate, Judas Iscariot. The text was written in Coptic, translated from an earlier Greek original. Scholars believe that original was composed around 140 CE, possibly in Syria or Egypt, by a community that followed teachings the church would later call blasphemy. It was mentioned once by name in 180 CE by a bishop named Irenaeus. He called it poison. He warned Christians not to read it. He said it glorified the traitor. And then, for 17 centuries, it vanished. Until Cairo. Until 1978. When a man tried to sell it for $3 million, no one bought it. So it sat in a safe deposit box in New York for 16 years, decaying. By the time scholars finally got their hands on it in the year 2000, much of it had turned to dust. But enough remained, enough to see what the church had buried. The Gospel of Judas does not open with betrayal. It opens with intimacy. Jesus is laughing. He's standing with his disciples and they're praying over bread, performing a ritual. But Jesus finds it funny. He knows something they don't. He tells them they're praying to the wrong God, not to the Father, but to a lesser deity, a creator who fashioned the material world as a prison. In Gnostic belief, the God of the Old Testament, the one who made flesh and bone and blood, is not the true God. He is Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, a blind, jealous archon who trapped divine sparks inside human bodies, and the other disciples, according to this gospel, serve him without knowing it. But Judas sees. Jesus pulls him aside. He tells him, "You will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me." Not betray, sacrifice. The body is a prison, the flesh is the cage, and someone has to open the door. Judas is not the villain. He is the only one who understands, the only one strong enough to do what must be done, to free the Spirit of Christ from the trap of incarnation. This is not the story you were told in Sunday school. In the canonical Gospels, Judas is possessed by Satan. He sells Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. He kisses him in the garden, marking him for arrest. And then, consumed by guilt, he hangs himself. The church built 2,000 years of theology on that narrative. Judas, the friend who turned, the ultimate sinner, the man whose name became synonymous with treachery. But what if that story was written by people who didn't understand, or worse, by people who did understand and wanted to hide it? The Gnostics believed salvation came through knowledge, gnosis, not faith, not obedience, knowledge, secret knowledge, the kind that couldn't be taught in a church or written in a creed. It had to be revealed, whispered, earned. And Jesus, in their tradition, was not a lamb led to slaughter. He was a teacher, a liberator, someone who came to show humanity the way out of the prison of flesh. But the world didn't want to hear that. The world wanted sacrifice, blood, atonement, a story that made suffering sacred. So the Gnostics were silenced, their books burned, their leaders exiled or killed, and their version of Judas, the enlightened disciple, was rewritten into history's greatest monster. But the manuscript survived, buried, burned, sold, forgotten. And now read, what did Judas really say before the betrayal? According to the lost gospel, he said nothing, because there was no betrayal. There was only obedience, a terrible, necessary obedience. Jesus showed him a vision, a house, vast and holy, and he told him, "Your star will lead you." Judas would be cursed by men, hated for generations, but in the eyes of those who know, he would be the greatest, not because he was good, but because he was willing to be hated, willing to carry the weight of a lie, willing to free the Christ, even if it meant damning himself in the eyes of the world. They didn't want you to read this. For 17 centuries they kept it buried, and now that it's surfaced, they call it heresy. They say it's corrupted, mistranslated, a fabrication, but the codex is real. The Coptic is clear, and the question it raises cannot be unasked. What if the betrayal was the plan all along? If this gospel troubles you, perhaps it should. Perhaps that's the point. Stay close. There's more to uncover, and some of it you won't forget. The Gospel of Judas was not written by Judas. That much we know. It was written by someone who believed they understood what Judas understood. Someone who belonged to a sect the church fathers called Cainites, followers of Cain, worshippers of the serpent, believers in the idea that every villain in Scripture was actually a hero, because every villain defied the demiurge, the false god, the jailer. They revered Cain for killing Abel. They praised the people of Sodom for rejecting angels. They honored Esau for despising his birthright. And they exalted Judas for handing over the Son of the Creator. To them, these were not acts of sin. They were acts of rebellion against a God who demanded obedience, against a world built on lies. And if that sounds insane to you, consider this. They read the same scriptures you did. They just asked different questions. Why would a loving God create a world full of suffering? Why would he demand blood sacrifice? Why would he punish curiosity? Why would he forbid knowledge? The Gnostics looked at the God of Genesis and saw something else. Not a father, a tyrant, not a creator, a counterfeiter. And Jesus, in their theology, did not come to die for that God. He came to expose him. This is why the Gospel of Judas was buried. Not because it was false, but because it was dangerous. In the 2nd century, Christianity was still forming. There was no Bible, no Pope, no agreed-upon doctrine. There were dozens of Gospels, dozens of interpretations, communities scattered across the Roman Empire, each with their own texts, their own teachers, their own understanding of who Jesus was. Some believed he was fully divine, others believed he was fully human, some believed he never died at all, that the crucifixion was an illusion, a trick played on the Romans, and some, like the Cainites, believed the crucifixion was necessary, not as atonement, but as escape. The Gospel of Judas belonged to this latter group, and when the church consolidated power, it decided which books were sacred and which were poison. 4 Gospels made it in: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Everything else was condemned, burned, banned. Possessing a Gnostic text became a crime. Teaching from one could get you killed. And so the gospel went underground, copied in secret, passed between believers in whispers, until even the whispers stopped. But the ideas didn't die. They surfaced again in the medieval heresies, the Cathars, the Bogomils, groups that preached the material world was evil, that the God of the Old Testament was not the true God, that salvation meant escape from flesh, not resurrection of it. The church called them dualists, devil worshippers, and it crushed them. The Albigensian crusade in the 13th century wiped out the Cathars almost entirely. Entire towns burned, men, women, children, all for believing the wrong things about God, all for asking the wrong questions about Judas. And still, the gospel survived, in fragments, in echoes, in condemned writings that referenced it without naming it. Irenaeus, the bishop who warned against it, gave us the only description we had for over a millennium. He wrote that the gospel claimed Judas alone possessed the secret knowledge, that he betrayed Jesus as an act of obedience to a higher mystery, that the other apostles were ignorant, deceived, worshipping the wrong power. Irenaeus called this teaching absurd, blasphemous, a perversion of truth. But he didn't deny it existed. He couldn't. Too many people had read it. Then it vanished, until 1945, until a farmer in Egypt pulled it from the sand. When the Nag Hammadi library was discovered, it changed everything. Scholars suddenly had access to texts the church thought it had erased. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Apocalypse of Peter, the secret book of John. These were not late forgeries. They were early, some as old as the canonical Gospels, some possibly older. And they told a very different story, a story where Jesus spoke in riddles, where salvation was earned through insight, not faith, where the apostles were often confused, often wrong, and where one of them, Judas, was set apart. But the Gospel of Judas itself didn't appear in that collection. It was somewhere else, in the hands of a dealer, moving through the black market, passed from smuggler to collector to scholar, each one trying to profit or protect or prove its authenticity. By the time it reached the National Geographic Society in the early 2000s, it was in terrible condition. Pages missing, text faded, sections crumbled into powder. A team of experts spent years reconstructing it, translating it, arguing over it. And when they finally published it in 2006, the world reacted exactly as the Church Fathers would have wanted. Most dismissed it, called it Gnostic fanfiction, a second-century fabrication with no historical value. Others were fascinated but cautious. A few saw it as vindication, proof that the early church had suppressed competing narratives, proof that history is written by those who win, and proof that Judas, the man condemned for 2 millennia, might have been something other than a traitor. But here's the question no one wants to answer. If the gospel is a lie, why did they bury it? If it's fiction, why did bishops warn against it by name? If it's harmless, why did they kill people for reading it? The church says it protects truth, but truth doesn't need protection. Truth can defend itself. What needs protection is power, control, the kind of control that comes from telling people what to believe and punishing them when they don't. The Gospel of Judas threatened that control, not because it was true, but because it made people think. It made them ask whether the villain might be the hero, whether the God they worshipped might be the enemy, whether the story they'd been told their entire lives was a lie. And that's the real reason it was buried. In the lost gospel, Jesus tells Judas he will be cursed by men, but he also tells him he will rule over them, not in this world, in another, in the realm beyond flesh, beyond matter, beyond the prison the demiurge built. Judas will be hated, but he will be free. He will be reviled, but he will know. And knowledge to the Gnostics was the only salvation that mattered. So what did Judas really say before the betrayal? Maybe nothing, maybe everything. Maybe he looked at Jesus and understood what no one else could. That the kiss in the garden wasn't a mark of betrayal. It was a mark of love. The terrible love of someone willing to be damned so another could be saved. not the salvation the church preaches, the other kind, the kind that doesn't promise heaven, only release. The gospel ends with Judas walking toward the high priests. The text is fragmentary there. We don't know what he said, we don't know what he felt, but we know he went, and we know that in the theology of the Cainites, that made him the greatest of the apostles. The one who loved enough to be hated, the one who obeyed enough to be cursed, the one who saw the truth and carried it into the dark. Some say the gospel is heresy, maybe it is. Some say it's history, maybe it's not, but it's here now, out of the sand, out of the jar, out of the silence. And once you've read it, you can't unread it. Once you've considered it, you can't unconvince yourself. And once you've asked the question, it doesn't go away. What if Judas didn't betray Jesus? What if he freed him? The bishops burned the answer. But the question remains. If you've come this far, you're already too deep to turn back. Follow this channel, because the buried texts don't end here, and neither does the truth they tried to kill.